Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our first Philosophy Intersections presentation for the spring semester. I'm Dr. Anthony McCauley, the Director of Philosophy at Western State Colorado University. Tonight, we will be presenting Dr. Michael Vieregge, who will be giving us his presentation, Career Progression, a Constant Over Time. And we're really happy to have Dr. V with us tonight, who has given some philosophy intersection presentations before, and they're always that perfect combination of practical with theoretical. So it's a pleasure to have him tonight. Also, one quick announcement, our next philosophy intersections will take place on March 18th, and it will be called Waiting for Godot, What Beckett Really Didn't Want You to Know. And it will be on March 18th, that's 2 weeks from Wednesday. And it will feature the director and the students involved in Peak Productions' presentation of Waiting for Godot. So, thank you very much for attending. I will hand it off to Dr. Vieregge.
Well, thank you very much, Anthony. Well, good evening, everybody, and thank you very much for being here. My name is, as Anthony said, nobody knows me really by my name, but it's Dr. V. Seems to be the nickname that gets stuck. And I'm in the School of Business here at Western, and I focus on tourism and resort management. And the topic of progression and careers is a natural one because you might be aware that hospitality tourism has a very high turnover. As it is already as an industry, we typically run 140 to 300% turnover compared to other industries at 40, 60%, so on. So career and career progression, succession planning comes natural to us. The other one is I'm a father of a Generation X and Generation Y children. So I don't know whether it's the intellectual intercourse with the, or discourse, I should say, sorry, with the topic or my struggle with my children over what I think their career should be and what their ideas are, what the career should be. So without further ado, I would like to talk about career progression. And over the last couple of weeks, I followed the popular press, and the popular press really seems to have the thumb on the pulse of change, better so than academic research, which needs some lead time. We always need some time before we catch on. And there was not a day that I opened the Wall Street Journal or Newsweek or any kind of newspaper or journal that there was not a topic that deals with generations and generations at work and the way that work is structured and the progression of work is structured. So the White House policy changes that were discussed to shore up the workforce participation, increase of workforce productivity, the discussion of increase of the minimum wage, and a company like Walmart, which necessarily does not volunteer to give higher wages, is thinking about $10 for their entry-level positions. We have seen examples in Seattle and San Francisco where some companies pay up to $15 for entry-line positions. So there is everyday discussion in newspapers, so the topic is certainly at the forefront of our thinking in business. The other day I found an article, I don't have a job, I have a higher calling. It was a headline of a big Wall Street Journal article, and in the era of horizontal work, a big expose in Newsweek. So the popular press certainly has picked up on this topic and the relevance to it to today's environment. I went back to Webster. I know today the temptation is to go online and get your first definition line, but I thought, well, I should go to the dictionary. And when you look at process or progression, the definition, I like the definition movement towards a destination or a more advanced state as a definition of what is progression or progress. So when we look at that terminology, we see that there is a continuous movement towards a goal over time. It has typically a starting point, and it has a finishing point or an ending point. It is gradual, it's a step-by-step process, and we connect the concepts of linear movement and also a vertical development with that definition. Okay, so these are concepts that typically are associated with that. By the way, there is a definition not only just for business, but every field has a somewhat particular definition of progression. So when I talk about progression, I do not dare to talk about arithmetic. I don't dare to talk about astronomy. Music, I would not have an idea what progression is in those fields, but obviously they have their own definition of the term progression. So when I talk about progression tonight, I talk it in the context of business. We have the term progressive, as you probably don't like it because tax time is coming up. Nobody likes taxes, but we have the term progressive taxes as a key concept in our tax law, in our tax system. We also use it in human resources. Okay, when we deal in human resources, we talk about educational progression. When we talk about training, cross-training, that means teaching people new skills, new competencies that we need for them to have. More specifically tonight, I would like to address the concept of career progression, or some people call it also career development. That's an extensive field within the human resource area in business. And when we talk about it in business, we talk about a step-by-step movement through an organization from an entry level to top management. That's a classical picture that probably comes to your mind too, is when we talk about career progression is entry-level job in a business, in an organization, and you move through the different layers of that organization to top management. That's really the classical definition, and it's a step-by-step up the career ladder that we see. So some of you are probably familiar with pictures like this. I mean, they're either a ladder by itself, a hill that people go up to, but typically when we look at career progression in a classical sense, we look at this step-by-step, a continuous set of steps that lead up to the top, whatever that means in this setting. And it's uninterrupted. That means there's no break between those steps, but rather you move from one step to another. And it is linear. There's no room for detours. There's no way for a circle or anything else but a linear progression. It begins with a lower starting point, and it ends hopefully in top management. It's a vertical movement. That means it's going up, hopefully, and not down. And it's clearly defined steps in a hierarchy. That means you know exactly what you have to do at this step, and you know exactly what is expected of you at this higher step. So clearly defined by a business, by an organization, what is involved in each and every step of that career ladder. And we talk about a hierarchy. So when we talk about career progression, it is a management tool. And it's a basic agreement between an employer and an employee. Okay? So it's a contract that we have, a compact that we have, and that it has as a basis a motivational intent. The motivation is for an organization to provide an outcome that is appreciated by the employee, and it is by the business or the organization something that they give in return. And it's typically material that is given as a motivational tool for those employees. When that basic compact between the organization and each employer happens, it's really an economic exchange model. If you go back to Marx and the exchange of labor for pay, it's really the beginning of this kind of economic model. And it's very traditional, and it's very hierarchical in thinking. That means somebody from a lower position is getting, for certain loyalty, certain performance in the organization, a raise to a higher position. Okay. Please, by the way, interrupt me if you have questions or I go too fast, or if you have an immediate question, I'd rather have you interrupt me and not being able to think of it at the end. Okay. What is the compact based on? Really, it's a promise by an organization. Could be a business, not-for-profit, could be a for-profit business, that we use succession planning. That means we give people an opportunity, a goal, to promote their career with our organization from a base-level job to a mid-level job to a top-level job. That is really the basic promise that a company gives. And the other part of that, and this is really the one that's under attack in today's business, is job security. When that model worked at its best, there was no question. People had job security. They had a career path within an organization. Anybody have parents that worked for a company for 20 years, 25 years? Okay. You think you will be working 25 years for the same company?
I hope probably not.
You hope not, you want to say, right? Okay. Yeah.
And I was like, well, I guess it could be worse than having a solid job. But
Yeah.
I would rather have mobility in my career.
Mobility, and also the expectation is somewhat today that we might work 25 years but not with the same organization. Okay, so and that's one of the big parts where that contract is failing today, that neither side is really willing to enter that job security part of the contract. Okay, define that each step is defined, the requirements are very clearly outlined, and that we have promotion systems that are based on achievement. Okay, so it's very clear there's a reward, there's an expectancy that if I provide a certain productivity or a certain level of work, that I will get that reward. And it's not because your name is Joe and your name is Bill, you don't get that reward and somebody else does. So it has to be a very clear definition and a very clear action by the organization to consistently provide this career step based on performance and work and not on any other criteria. Provide training and professional development that goes hand in hand with that career ladder. That means you provide the employee with the skills, you provide the competencies, you provide the things, also mentoring what a candidate needs so that they can move in the career ladder. So that was part of the organizational part of that contract. We also deliver pay, benefits, perk increases as people get up the career ladder. So there's a clear pay increase if you move from one position to the next. There's also an addition of pay, perks, benefits that come with that position. So that's really the organization side to that contract. And we'll see later how changes in our environment have impacted that contract. On the employee side, employees have to bring something to the table too in this negotiation. They have to respect the organization and the authority within that organization. So there's a basic loyalty, there's a basic belief in an organization and its ability to be fair and just towards employees. That has to be a basis on part of the employee. The employee is expected to be committed and loyal to that organization. Okay, so if I provide a career development to you or promotions, I expect that you're loyal and committed to my organization. That work centrality, that means work plays a central role in your life. Okay, that means work is more important than your private, your family life. Work takes a very large part of your day-to-day life. And put in hard work and time, be diligent, basically pay your dues for whatever position you work in an organization. Okay? So this is really the compact that underlies the traditional career development concept where both sides have this agreement, and it works, obviously, until what point? And this is the chicken and egg question, right? One side cancels the contract. Typically, we go to a lawyer and settle it, but in this case, it just falls apart and we have a new paradigm, we have a new situation evolving in our society. So you probably have seen that, organizational charts, where you have entry-level management. You start somewhere in a company, you graduate from school. In hospitality, you typically start an assistant manager somewhere in the industry. Then you move into, so that means lower level entry in management, mid-level management, and top management. That was the chart. And it's kind of a direct line. You know exactly, if I fulfill my job, this is where I move. If I fulfill this job, then I move up into top management. I mean, it's very simplistic, but that's basically what we have underlying that career path model or career progression model. All right. In the Western industry, we also have symbolism. Every culture has its own symbolism of how that progression has been rewarded, what has been the outcome. And we have that both at work and outside of work. An interesting one, I put it here for work environment. If you're an entry-level manager, very often you don't have a private office. You have the parking lot that's way out there, and you might as well walk from home because you parked that far out as an entry-level manager. As you move up the career progression or the career ladder, you get rewards at work that symbolize that progression. So suddenly you have a private office, so you don't have to be in a group office, and you have a reserved parking lot, so you don't have to fight everybody else in the morning when you come to work. And then when you get to top management, what we value in the Western system, top floor corner office with windows, right? Nice view, close in, and hopefully covered parking so you don't get wet as you go into the building. By the way, this works for the Western society. I talked to some people from other cultures where they don't have elevators, and the bottom floor office is actually the one that they esteem very highly because you don't have to walk up 8 flights of stairs. So it depends on where you are, but this works for us. This also works at home. I remember when I lived in Germany, it was a very clear designation of what you drive as a car at what level of management. When I was an entry-level manager, I was expected to drive a VW Golf, a Rabbit. When you moved into mid-level management, you invested into a BMW 300 series. And when you were top management, you bought a Mercedes. And you didn't break that kind of convention because if you were a lower-level manager and you showed up as a Mercedes, that did not sit well with the organization and the bosses at that time. So it was a clear symbolism of outcomes, success outcomes, connected to career progression in our society. Well, obviously, underlying this is that there is a value in those material outcomes that motivates us. Okay, so that was the assumption that having this kind of material outcomes is a motivator for people. And as we see later, that kind of model of motivation is really challenged and has been changed over the last years. Let me switch gears a little bit and go from career progression, the concept of that, to generation. And as I said before, you open the newspaper today and there's an article about generations at work and the tensions and the managerial challenges that it provides. I took a definition from Becton, Walker, and Jones Farmer in 2014, and this probably expresses better what a generation is. A generation, often called a cohort, consists of people of similar age in a similar location who experience similar social, historical, and life events. What it obviously means is that people have to be of a certain age group, also location. That means if we have certain generational divisions here in the US, those kind of divisions do not apply somewhere else because those shaping experience and those shared experience that people have might be completely different in another society. So please, when we talk about generations here today, I talk very much about our US-based interpretation of that generation. If we talk in Mexico, I would know whether our definition of a generation X or Y would hold true within those societies. So please keep that in mind. And this is really the key, as Engelhard Norris mentioned, the shared experiences, and it's during the forming years. Not as adults, but rather as we grow up, what defines a generation is shared experiences that you have as a growing up person. Whether it's now Woodstock, or the hippie days, or it's a war, a depression, those are the forming parts of your life as you grow up. So what does it form? It forms attitudes, values, beliefs, and expectations. Okay, so that's typically how generations are. Again, definitions suggest that we have different national cultures that, depending on the national cultures or countries, these generations are different. Also within, you should think in the US, everybody agrees on the time frame for certain generations, and that is not further from the truth, because we still struggle exactly what are the years for the generation. So you read some study somewhere and they have a couple years, say like generation Y, ending in 2000, and some other people, like you will see myself, ending in 2004. Okay, so there is not even agreement in academia and research exactly how those shared experiences end and where do we have that dividing line between the generations. So when we talk about the US, again, this is one approach, one way of interpreting the generations. The generations that we have seen last is the lost generation, or the generation of 1914, born between 1883 and 1900, very much formed by World War I and the experiences of World War I. The greatest are GI generation, very much formed through the Great Depression and also World War II. The baby boomers, and we focus in red, I put it in red because these are the three generations right now that we focus on in the workplace. The baby boomers, as of today, or actually this year, everybody is over 50 years old in that generation, and then Generation Y as a large incoming generation, and in between Generation X. So we talk about baby boomers 1945 to 1964, Generation X 65 to 84, and Generation Y, or the millennials, from 1985 to 2004. Again, some people would say it stops at 2000. And then the newest generation, people born really after 2000, Generation Z is right now the term that is used. Yes?
What's the source of debate between 2004 and 2000? Is it 9/11, whether or not that defines a generation?
You know what? It's actually for statistical purpose because they like the same years to cover. You know, that comes out of Harvard, and Harvard said, you know, they like to have the same time period.
So not
but again,
shared experience.
not a shared experience, but for statistical purposes. Okay. So, and there might be other reasons that I'm not aware of, but that was the main reason given.
Funny.
Okay. So, and again, you can argue either way, and a lot of people have argued with that interpretation.
Sure.
Okay. So, yes.
What's the origin of these names? I get baby boomers, but where do the other names come from?
Now, boy, I have to get online and check that. I really I never thought about it, actually. I mean, the millennials, obviously, with the turn
Yeah.
2000, that's clear. But where Generation X came, anybody?
Greatest is, I think it has to do with World War.
Yeah, those are the, you know,
Economic,
yeah. And
economic and overcoming the depression, all that.
Yeah.
It took us into the
yeah. And the baby boomers, obviously, the birth-rich years in the 50s and 60s. But how Generation X and Y? You sent me back to the books. I have to.
Wasn't X that there was nothing defining about us? You know, we didn't have like, other than like the space shuttle or something, we didn't have like an event.
It was either nothing necessarily defining, or the fact that we were in a trough after the baby boom.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so there was
Yeah.
a big population bust instead of a boom, so that had to do with it too, but yeah, it was more kind of a cynicism too.
Cynicism,
We
loss.
didn't want to define ourselves, we didn't want to be defined, and we were hard to define.
Could be. That's-
You're so punk.
No, wait, are you Gen X?
Right up the bubble.
Anyway, so right now this is roughly the generations, and what we focus on is today, I mean, we still have some of the silence retiring. Some of those people hung on, lost some of the retirement in the last economic downturn in 2009. But basically the silents are moving out of the labor force. And the big one we have today is between the baby boomers en masse moving out of the labor force and Generation Y moving into the labor force. Generation X is somewhere lost. I don't know where that's where the X comes from, in the middle. Even so, if you look at the numbers, Generation X is a huge generation, actually larger than the others. 84 million people today are counted as part of Generation X. Baby boomers 78 million, and Generation Y 76 million. But this transition from these people hopefully retiring and these people getting jobs is where that conflict comes from. Okay? So I went through a number of articles, and the articles are in the back if somebody is interested in getting that list. I can send it to you. We're faced with an intergenerational workplace conflict which impacts organizational performance. That seems to be a big discussion point, flat platform within the literature. Okay, that there is a generational conflict, that businesses, organizations have to address it to stay effective. Okay, because if we don't address that generational issue, we might have a breakdown of performance. There's another literature out there say, well, really, generational discussion has too much attention, and there are really other factors that explain this conflict between baby boomers and Generation Y better. This would be age, life stage, career stage, nature of job as a substitute explanation for generational research. But the larger number of articles are really here, and if you can also look at trust the popular press is where the discussion is, that there is a generational change, that we do have a paradigm shift in the way that people look at work and the way that organizations provide that work. If you just look at the generations briefly, the silent generation, I included it here. Even so, most of these people are moving out of the workforce. As children, they were really dominated by the Great Depression. World War II, fought in Korean and Vietnam Wars as conscript. That means they didn't have a choice, but they had to fight. And if you look through the literature, and this is all the things that came out of looking at all these articles, what are descriptors of that generation? What described them best? The silent generation is considered the most loyal, highly dedicated to organizations. I mean, from all the generations, they have the highest loyalty to organizations. They focused on work and career and have the distinction of having the highest divorce rate of any generation because of that. They believe in the system. They believe in working together within a system. They do not like to take risk, and they conform to the common opinions, the common trends within a group. And they're very conservative when they conserve, and they save, obviously impacted by the experience of the Great Depression. Okay. Any questions on the silent? Okay. The baby boomers, 1945 to 64, growth and prosperity in the U.S., fought in Vietnam War as conscript, civil rights movement, the sexual revolution, part of their experience that came up. And what does it leave you with is loyal and dedicated to organizations, which is kind of a contradiction, because on the one side we went through the, well, I say we, I date it myself, right? We went through the 60s, which really brought a distrust of organizations, but yet when we moved into the family rearing times of the baby boomer generation, people settled down and they really worked very hard for organizations. They became very loyal to organizations. Even so, in the 60s, you would have never expected that to happen. So it's kind of a funny development. They're hardworking and diligent at work. They also value work higher than family life and time with family. So time at work, they're willing to put the time in. They like to measure their success by material outcomes. And they self-reliant, competitive, and control, and like to have the control of their own destiny, or believe that they control their destiny. Okay? And so, again, you might disagree with some points, and they obviously, every person you know might not display all these descriptors of the baby boomers, but some of them are certainly in almost everybody. Okay? John, you disagreed a little bit on...
Well, I agreed with you when you said it's just strange that they become such an organizationally loyal generation after the countercultural.
Oh, yeah. But I think it came through, and that's why some people say the situation might explain more than the generation, that suddenly you have to pay a mortgage, you have to pay for your children, and that suddenly changed people's focus. Okay? Generation X, 65 to 84, the shared experiences that come out of literature is the economic uncertainty, the recession, inflation, high unemployment, and the downsizing of the economies in the 80s. Okay, so that was really the forming years of Generation X. High divorce rates, they were the kids of the silent generation. So they saw a lot of their parents. And they had work-compulsive parents, people who were workaholics, we would call them. Okay? And as a consequence, they were latchkey, the first really true latchkey generation. Kids coming home, nobody being at home, everybody working to accomplish material outcomes for the family. Okay? So that's...
They were raised by the television.
They were raised by television and, well, you know. So the common descriptors that you will find in literature: distrustful of corporations from what they saw happen to their parents from both sides, less loyal, dedicated. They're more likely to leave an organization if something goes wrong. They're independent and self-learners because they had to manage their lives from very early on. They develop skills and take on challenges for fast promotion. They try to create a work-life balance, not as much as Generation Y, but already for them, because they saw their parents, the price the parents paid for the economic involvement and then the centrality of work. They then said, you know, we would like to have more balance between family life and work life. So that's really the start. Work is not as important. A lot of people say with the Generation X is the me generation. Okay, they focus more on the person rather than the organization and how we work together. And last, Generation Y, are the millennials. In 1985, more or less, most people agree on mid-80s as a starting time and going to 2000 or a little bit after. Baby boom parent organized life. The parents are very active in their children's life, organized almost everything, every activity. Soccer moms, you know the terms that go with that, where kids are kept busy all the time and involved. There was little need to work. One of probably the downfall of the baby boomers was that they tried to provide everything for their children, and instead of people working early on in high school, you know, try to contribute a little bit, they didn't have the need for that kind of work experience. And actually came back later when they wanted to go into the workforce, and they had no work experience whatsoever. So they started at zero rather than their parents who had already jobs through high school and worked early on. They had extended schooling. Today, Generation Y is the best educated generation, more education than any other. Very technology savvy. I mean, they native to technology. And they also global orientation, or they have a global orientation. Okay, they believe in globalization. They're global-centric. They open diversity and inclusion of different people. They are most educated and technology savvy. I think I just said that. Most team-centric and family-oriented. Okay, so interesting enough, for Generation Y, the family becomes very important. Generation X is more critical of family, and Generation Y is not. They have no work experience, but they're willing to work hard. But the key is, and we come back to that later, success is not measured in the car or the house that they have in the suburbs, but rather the meaningful work. And that's where we come later back, where business is struggling today. How do you provide that in a job? They want work-life balance. So it's not just all about work, but also having time and to be at home for the children. Generation Y person would make sure that they're at home at night to put the children to bed. That would have a very high value in their life. They value leisure time. They have a little bit of an entitlement attitude. That means they deserve to get certain things, and they were brought up this way. And when they look for jobs, they're willing to be loyal, but they ask for a number of perks and pay up front to provide that kind of loyalty. Yeah.
Do they feel as though they could make, the people that are researching this, do they feel as though they can make these kinds of conclusions about Generation Y since half of them aren't even in the workforce?
Well, it is right now, it's basically forecasting and what we see already,
yeah, okay,
yes.
yeah.
You know. And again, you will see changes too as that generation is aging. That's why people say in other approaches, as these people get older, they have to pay mortgages themselves. You know, you might also see some changes, yeah. So, yeah.
How do you think, so because Generation Y is most educated, how do you think the amount of college debt will affect the whoever's willing to pay me, regardless of like a meaningful work, like I'm gonna have so much debt that I'm not gonna have any choice. How do you think that will affect,
You're welcome.
like how do you think that will affect this generation and the work that we'll be able to do?
I mean, that's really the flip side of most educators, right? I mean, that's the high debt, and I think that's what we just mentioned before. I think the realization that you have to pay back at one point might bring some change with that generation because bills are there. And I think on a related note, what I think, and my students always get upset when I say, you will not retire as rich as your parents. Because of changes, your parents will use a lot of the money that they have accumulated to pay for their retirement, for being in assisted living homes, for retirement homes, and that's a very costly proposition. So you will not, or you cannot rely on an inheritance as it was before the case, where wealth was given from one generation to the other. Because of our lifestyle today, a lot of wealth will be used up. And my students always get very upset with me when I say that, but I said, yeah, who is going to take care of their parents? Who is taking their parents into their house or their apartment? And nobody is agreeing to do that. So I don't want to say everybody's not, but I'm just saying that's part of this kind of where the Generation Y might have to change some of their approaches.
How does it affect meaningful work, though? I think that's a really interesting point. You know, your choices are limited by just not wanting to default.
Okay.
And so how does that mix with meaningful work?
I think that comes in from the supply side, where companies today, because of the squeeze in the labor market, actually employers are coming up with meaningful work for that generation. They recognize that, so that they try to both address the need to pay bills, but also look at the meaningfulness.
How do you think us growing up with the U.S. being in war our entire lives over in the Middle East, how do you think this will affect the views on government and, in the long term? Because, we've grown up with us being in the Middle East ever since we were born.
Well, I mean, I think you can have both outcomes of that one. I mean, a lot of people who came out of Vietnam, really rejected organizations and the system, were critical of the system, and for other people, they had no problems. So I think it's very highly individual. But as a society, I think we're critical. I mean, most people you talk to come back, they ask the question why. Okay, so there could be more of a critical component there. Okay. And again, it might be also flavoring their attitude towards business organizations. Okay. So what is then the impact on career progression? So we talked about generations, coming back to what does it do to career progression. So the career progression worked as management tool for silent and baby boomer generations because that basic compact or contract was still intact. The organizations provided job security, career progression. We still had a hierarchical organization with hierarchies very clearly defined. We allowed for step-by-step development. Hard work and time were rewarded with advancement material gains. The employees of these two generations, they were loyal. We saw those descriptors. They were dedicated to the organization. They were willing to give that back. They were respectful of authority. And some people say because of that extensive military exposure that those generations had, that might be part of that. They have learned respect and discipline, hard work and time investment, and work centrality and material outcomes. For Generation X and Y, those basic components are not in place anymore. The basic compact is no longer intact. It has been broken. The organizations, and again, this comes back to chicken and egg question. Who started? What started it? And to me, what happens is really in the 80s when we saw the economic decline, the impact of imports, and the need to outsource jobs from the US. And a lot of people lost their jobs because of the economic crisis. So layoffs, closures of companies, outsourcing of production is what Generation X as children saw in that time period. Okay, so obviously companies did not uphold the promise of job security and employment that they had given. Also the hierarchy, remember the step-by-step that you go up, we phrase that as re-engineering. Re-engineering is an elegant term for saying you're cutting out levels of management. to save cost. So that was happening too. So what used to be very clearly defined steps, how you progressed in your career, with re-engineering, a whole layer and opportunity to move up disappeared. Some people stayed at a lower level management, only very few were promoted up to that level that skipped that one that was eliminated. Okay, so the whole concept, the change of organization to save cost, impacted obviously the understanding on how succession and progression worked. And hard work and time investment were not rewarded with job security anymore. What happened, people worked for companies for 20 years, and that doesn't necessarily mean that seniority allowed you to stay on. Okay? Companies did not value that kind of time put in by the employees any longer. Okay? So we saw a drastic change from the organization side. On the employees of both generations, what happened is they reacted with less loyalty to those organizations. They saw what happened. They were distrustful of organizations, large business. Big corporations became almost like the enemy of those people. They questioned authority. They did not necessarily believe if a superior would tell them something that was true, that they should follow it. They actually saw their promotion in higher skills. So instead of having promotion based on time seniority, promotion built on expert authority or expert power, as we would call it, and getting influence that way. They looked for independence, lifelong learning to improve those skills that they could exchange for pay, and they wanted to have a work-life balance. It's also the first time that we start to see the term horizontal work. So people held multiple jobs to pay bills. So people did not just work for one company, but they held multiple positions. Plus, they did not just have a vertical career development within one company, but they had to have lateral movements from company to company to move forward in their careers, to make career jumps. So a lot of horizontal rather than vertical movement within the workforce. And then the success was measured in meaningful work. So it was not the house, it was not the car, that was really what counted as a motivational outcome, but rather was the work meaningful. If you look today in the newspapers, a lot of uncertainty in the real estate market is that a lot of the Generation Y does not want a house. You know, the single-family house in the suburbs was a dream for many, many years, and today real estate developers talk about the 200 square foot flat downtown that people want to rent, and they want to stay flexible. So a lot of the things that we have taken for granted will be changed. So returning to the original question, career progression, is it constant? As a management tool and a basic context for economic change, it has been impacted and it has been changed. It's changing, and it should make sense. If we talk about progress, it cannot be constant. So that the term has to be redefined. The re-engineering, the outsizing of work, the attitude towards work in the organization, and the motivation to work have really clearly changed on both sides. So the baby boomers move out, organizations continue to re-engineer and redesign organizations, and what happens to the term career progression, what happened is the following is the hard work and time investment, the seniority are replaced by skills, promotion criteria, and basis for higher pay and benefits. And this has led to some strange situations, especially when you look at technology, where suddenly Generation Y became the trainers of people of the baby boomer generation. Because they are native to technology, they have those skills, they're able to get jobs based with those skills, but in the workforce they find baby boomers who are not as comfortable to a large degree with that technology. So suddenly they have expert power over authority that comes with position. Okay, so we see that happen and create some problems. Linear sequential promotion are replaced by non-sequential promotion based on abilities. We talk about horizontal work, I just explained that. And today the concept of micro-entrepreneurship, where every employee basically becomes an independent contractor for work. So you hire yourself out to the best paying for the best time period that fits your lifestyle. So everybody has control over their work and their ability to work and basically sells it in the labor market.
Could you explain horizontal work again?
Horizontal work means that people do not just have one job in one organization, but they have multiple jobs to pay bills.
But wouldn't they have more linear options? Because they have two jobs, two different positions they could attain to move up?
Yes, they could. It could be in different organizations that they take the next step. Okay? But they have to very often take multiple jobs to pay bills. Okay? And they have to have that what we call lateral movement from one organization to the next to move up. Okay? You don't have that opportunity within your organization. Okay? Loyalty is obtained by offering meaningful work, and what you might hear is making the planet a better place, peace on earth, cathedral builders rather than bricklayers. That means HR, human capital, departments of business today, when they produce something, they tie to a responsibility of that company towards society, the environment, and so on. And that's sometimes difficult. How do you put meaningfulness into building a Harley-Davidson motorcycle? Okay, if you are there on the production line. But that's the challenge, and that's what the employers are looking at right now is how do you create meaningfulness in each and every job that needs to be completed, needs to be filled by somebody. Okay, so we become very creative, and I say, come up with these kind of slogans that you see all over. Perks are less materials, but rather allow more leisure family time and allow ultimately for self-actualization. Goes back to Maslow over 60 years ago, and a more advanced stage. So we're coming back to progression, that people want an advanced stage from progression, but it just has a different outcome. What does it leave us with as business? In business, we have moved to what we call the kinship economy. We had the technology, information age economy, and for the last 2 years, futurists and trendsetters in the business are talking about what we call the kinship economy. It's a relationship economy. Okay? When we have a relationship economy, it's really based on trust or organizational trust. And there are two facets to that trust that we're looking at today. One is obviously the customer's trust in a brand. That means you as a customer buying a certain product, that means you trust that product. It was produced in an environmentally sensible way. It had employees that were fairly treated. Okay? So you want to trust that brand, and you will be able to relate emotionally to that brand. The other part of that trust is the employee's trust in the organization. Is the organization trustworthy as an employer? What are they providing? And what we really look for there is meaningful work as a citizen of, as a global citizen, as a company. So is it trustworthy, and what we would call that, is it a branded employer? That means like a brand, we cannot be loyal to that. So what has happened when we talk about business, we talk about value creation. I'm sorry, it's not very philosophical, but it comes down to, and when we talk about business, we typically talk about the 3 C's to create value. That means the financial capital, the intellectual capital, over the last couple of years, the human capital, that means our employees, and probably the last 2 years, the new C that we have is trust capital. So big organizations, their thinkers, their main strategists are focusing on how do we develop the trust of that generation Y so that they want to have a career with us because we can promote and give as an organization a meaningful work environment. And again, it's sometimes hard in certain businesses to make it very meaningful if you have to clean a hotel room, for example, which is hard physical work, but you still want to have a meaningful work environment. So anyway, so that's really how business is responding to this. This is where I think cutting edge right now. This is where the trendsetters, the futurists are moving for business.
How does social media play into our trust of companies? Because I realize one bad social media frenzy could completely ruin a company, and the same goes the opposite direction. If one company gets a good publicity, all the stores will be empty the next day because everyone just went and visited. Like,
It's certainly, I mean, if you look about trust creation, social media is huge. Because as you said, if you think about TripAdvisor, somebody writes a bad report about a hotel or restaurant, it goes viral, and if you're not right on top of it, that can undermine the trust, both of the customer, but also of your employees. So yeah, it's huge because there's no room, no time limitation on how fast the word gets out. So yeah, that is a big one that companies have to deal with. By the way, good jobs out there because companies hire today people who constantly monitor the social media. You have to get back immediately to avoid that kind of trust destruction.
So thinking about one of your earlier slides with the ladder
Mm-hmm.
and progression going up, and you referenced the popular literature as being a source for a lot of this. I'm thinking about my AARP magazine,
Okay.
where it seems like the image is more appropriately a freestanding ladder,
Okay.
where people read the pinnacle of their career, but they're not quite ready to stop working. So they start climbing down the ladder
Okay.
to get more free time, more, they don't need the income so much anymore, but they still want to be contributors to their organization, or they might even do volunteer work
Mm-hmm.
in that other side of the ladder.
Okay.
So is there some discussion about that and its impact on the generation that's trying to climb the ladder, but there's this backlog of people on the ladder?
I think the most extensive research is there, the relationship between baby boomers and Generation X, because the baby boomers have stuck and are staying around longer than anticipated. And what will happen is, or most likely what we see is that a lot of the transition of leadership will go from baby boomers to Generation Y, rather skipping Generation X. I mean, I'm not saying that it happens to everybody, but as a generational concept, that because of economic crisis, people losing a lot of value of their retirement, also the health of people, allowing people to work longer, that really Generation X is taking the brunt of this kind of being stuck on that ladder and not being able to, and that's why they very often go out on a horizontal level where they work for other people, because they cannot move up within those organizations. I don't know, did they?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
One of the things, and if you want to correct me on this, that's why I'm raising this, but one of the things that's clearly come through in your presentation tonight is that there's a vast difference between career and work. Should I be getting that out of this?
Yeah. Okay. And we don't know yet what the value of career is for Generation Y. We're not there yet.
That's what I'm wondering about, because it seems like that some of the people in the subsequent generations to my own, and I'm a mid-level boomer, it's career. It's not so much. Some of them aren't so interested in career. They're interested in work,
Yeah.
but not in a career.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if that's going to change. Continue to change this.
Well, that's what we talked about. I mean, the concept of loyalty, putting in time, some of these concepts that we associate with career will fall away. What we see right now with some of the companies paying more money, willingness to work with Generation Y is to really base it on the skill set they have, okay, rather than on seniority, the time, the loyalty, but rather we hiring people based on the skill, and it might be for certain projects, for certain parts, and then people move on. So it's almost like the contract work, and that's why we say with micro-entrepreneurship that almost every employee becomes its own employer.
Right.
Hiring out their skills and their services to different employers who are willing to pay good money for their service, but not long-term employment security.
Although that seems like it's really working without a net if you don't have benefit, because as contract labor, you don't have benefits, you don't have the benefit of having human resources looking out after you and that sort of thing. You're kind of on your own.
And that's, I think, with the realization, that's what I talked before when my students get very upset in class. When I say, right now you have a safety net. A lot of them assume if they fail, the parents are still there to catch them. They will not let them fall. And whether it's with money, insurance, any kind of security, I don't think there's any kind of urgency that people feel. And I think once that becomes clear that there is urgency, that might change some of the attitudes towards career and work. So a longer term job might be attractive suddenly, okay, because you need that kind of security. The problem is business still around to provide that? That will be the interesting one to see whether the business model will actually move back and recreate that hierarchy and that kind of a part of a contract. And my estimation would be no. I don't think business will move back to that kind of a contractual agreement.
How does that affect organizational innovation? It seems like on one hand, the horizontal model means you're getting this constant infusion of new ideas. But on the other hand, you're losing institutional memory and leadership, right, needed for knowing what risks to take, what risks not to take. So how does that balance out in terms of innovation?
Well, I think you probably have the models that we have already in some industry, like if you look at the airline industry, where you have a core business that is called Boeing or Airbus,
Right.
but every project is driven by contracting. Okay? So people come and go. If there is a Dreamliner project, you assemble people that bring in new ideas, different ideas, and they work together on the project, and then they go somewhere else if there's another airplane developer like Mitsubishi developing a new project. So you keep a core of people. I don't think organizations will go away because for those exact reasons. But I think the main production, the main driving of innovation, production will be through those kind of work groups or teams that you put together. I mean, that's whether it's true or not, we'll see in a couple of years, but that I see that kind of a
model.
model.
See more investment in a core leadership group, but still some openness. They had to have a skill set that's open to new ideas, disturbance.
Exactly. So I mean, that could be a model that works. I say it works very well in the airline industry.
So you said that the baby boomers are most likely to be replaced by Generation Y. How will that affect Generation X, and where is Generation X in this picture? Like, wouldn't logic want them to be replacing them? Like, how is that going to affect them not being able to replace the people the jobs they want?
Well, somebody said before, Generation X is cynical. Okay, so I mean, it has affected already some of the work relationships. I mean, if you talk to people that do the research, they find that there is actually a closer relationship between baby boomers and Generation Y in those kind of, because Generation X is really the one that is frustrated of not having that career opportunity, okay, and as people stay on.
So then what are like the Generation X people doing about this? Just being frustrated?
Well, I mean, I think you...
Those are your professors.
Well,
listening to about 25-year-old CDs.
Yeah.
But as we said, they're willing to learn. I mean, they were independent. I mean, their parents were working. So what they do is try to get expertise in skills and competences to protect their own positions. Okay? So that's what. And I'm not saying that no Generation X member has a chance to move up in organizations. That's not the case.
Just what you think will happen.
Yeah. And this is like if you look on a generational-wide confrontation.
Because a lot of what you've been talking about seems to be talking about businesses and organizations that have been around for a long time, that have these multiple generations working within them. In newer startups or companies that are very big and successful, but have started with kind of in the newer generations, is there a fundamental, do we have any research that says there's a fundamental change in organization of those companies themselves? Like, does it have a different organizational structure? Do these things still apply?
Okay.
Do we know?
I'm not 100% familiar with all the literature in that field.
Right.
But if you especially look at startup companies in the technology industry, most of those companies do not have the traditional hierarchy that it was set up in old industries, okay, and that you now see being destroyed and re-engineered. So they start with a wider span of management, more people supervise, or fewer people supervise a lot of people. High skills, people are very independent, so you have the ratio of managers to employees to be rather large, and promote independence, self-reliance of people, empowerment, we would call that. So you see that the startup companies start with a different model that does not resemble that classical hierarchy that you had before. So yes, I would say that's, especially for those startup companies in the microchip industry, computer industry, social media industry, they do not have that. It's also the status symbols. We talked about the symbolism. In most of these companies, I mean, you don't have individual offices, but rather you have a whole floor of cubicles and an open space where people work together. Whether you are the manager by position or not, people just interact and work together.
We're starting to cross over. The zoology department at University of Washington just did a $50 million building, and the faculty chose an open office plan, which I'd leave.
Yeah. And interesting enough, we did a project for McDonald's, went to Chicago, and of all companies, I thought that Chicago would have very traditional setup, and the whole top floor of top management was an open office. And they had glass windows around different cubicles with, for conferencing, but there was no wall where you couldn't see who was meeting with whom. And that included the CEO, the CFO, everybody on the top. And that was really against what I expected. I expected a very clear hierarchy at McDonald's, and that top management was just the top floor of their building. And
Yeah, there's a lot about that in the library literature. Is libraries renovating? Do we have, do the librarians get individual offices, or do they have an open floor plan?
Or do you have a pub?
There's then a pub. Yeah, keep bringing that up.
I'm pushing for a pub now.
But now they've actually done some studies that have shown that open office concept is not effective. People really don't like it. Architects like it because it looks cool, but it's not working out. And so the trend now is to go back to the traditional.
yeah, I mean, you obviously have to have all your organizational policies and all the way that you set up your business has to support it. And that's sometimes the problem, that you have a design or a space idea, or an idea for space, not a spacey idea, but an idea for the space, but yet from your organizational reward system, from your organizational day-to-day management, you're actually reinforcing the departmentalization of people. So what you try to do with space, you knock over with your actual day-to-day management. So it really has to be fully integrated, the physical space design with what you do as a company, as an organization. So, and that's hard, because people need to change. I mean, they have a chance, and you have to reinforce that in that organization and the values that you have in that organization.
How do job rushes affect career progression? Like one time they'll be like we need firefighters, and then everyone goes and becomes a firefighter. Like those kinds of things. Like how does that affect it?
Well, good question. Obviously, we cannot predict what is needed. I mean, that's always one of my standard answers, that we don't know what jobs are in need, also how they promote it. And obviously, if there's a shortage of employees, and we see that right now, the reason that Walmart is willing to pay $10, or some of these restaurants in Seattle are paying $15, is because of the shortage, not having enough people. So suddenly you pay more, you're willing to negotiate more rewards that people are appreciating. Okay, so supply and demand of labor has a big impact, also how fast you get promoted.
But do a lot of the jobs that are in these kinds of situations, do they usually offer lots of progression, or are they usually just kind of sit here at this desk and punch holes in these pages? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, it's both a little bit. I mean, you need to fill basic entry-level positions typically, but then you also need to promote faster, especially you have a shortage, a lower supply, and you need to grow. And that's, as I say, that's what we see right now, where you have an unemployment rate in the U.S., which is really the exact number that is replacement, and people are starting to fight over employees. So yes, and it's also partially connected through promises of what you can get from the companies. Whether it works will be interesting to see for Generation Y. What is the hurt level? How much more money do people have to pay per hour, or what do they have to promise to get to that meaningfulness of the work, or still offer that meaningfulness of the work?
I'm really interested in that last point about the meaningfulness of the work, and this is a disclaimer coming from a creative writer, but I wonder what you see, the difference between a bricklayer and a cathedral builder is evaluation, right? It's a conceptualization, an imaginative leap. And I wonder if you see any difference between the way liberal arts and business are relating to one another with these new generations or these new models, or is it remain the same?
I think there will be a lot more overlap because I think you have to be more creative in describing the why a work is done, not just that this is what you have to do and this is how you do it, which we normally do pretty well, but it goes more into what I think you call the creative side, and this is what these companies do with trust capital, trust in the organization to come up with a more creative, say, what is the why, what is the reason in that work, and trying to get that meaning across to employees to understand, hey, every job has a meaning, but to communicate that to the employees will be the crux of the matter. So, and I think that's it. Quite, creativity comes in there. Also working rather not just with numbers, but with narrative, context that you put your work into. So I think we'll see quite a bit of change, and closing that gap perhaps.
Are you seeing a further step between like cathedral builder and bricklayer where that meaning is co-created? Looking at the open office plan, for example, I'm assuming trust capital is not just about the sort of higher levels working harder to explain meaning, but the sort of new leadership styles to have meaning co-created. Are you seeing that?
Well, we have that in joint goal setting, for example, for a number of years already, where you try to get together with the employees. Management by objective, for example, would be a system that we employ where you really try to have one-on-one set goals for each employee independent of the standards of a business. And there you can also try to get the why more involved because you can focus on that person. The problem of that is the reality of the size of a business and the resources. This works great if you have 10 employees and you can take that time to really sit with everybody and get that why across to that person and sit with them and work on a development plan where that why is central. Now think about a company like Starwood and you have 150,000 employees and suddenly you want to implement that system. That's where the challenge is, that you get that really to each and every employee. Because that becomes a resource issue. So I don't know how they're going to solve it. If I knew, I would not be here. I would make a lot of money advising the big companies.
Other questions?
Well, thank you very much. And again, just.